All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to OneSoccer. I'm your host for today, Josh Deming. I am joined by my colleague, Alex Gangue-Ruzic. And Mr. Alex, we have some fun Canadian transfer news to discuss today. It's official. Let me just present it so you guys can get a nice little peek of it. And Alex, it's not a spoiler. Junior Hoilett joins the Vancouver Whitecaps. But Alex, did you see what number he grabbed fresh off the press? Do you know?
11.
He did. I know. Why didn't he take number 10? I'm so confused. I don't get it.
That one's a long story because the Whitecaps haven't had a 10 in their MLS era because it is unofficially or officially, I think unofficially retired for Dominic Mobilio, who was quite the legend back in the day and rocked the 10 and died, unfortunately, rather young. So they've unofficially retired the number 10 shirt. So Hoilett gets 11, and that's why the likes of Ryan Gauld have been wearing 25, etc. over the years. Pedro Morales wore 77. If you ever wondered why.
I can say I did. As you know, as many of you know, I am a number buff. So I can say I didn't see anything on Google or whatever about it. So a little unofficial retirement for the number 10. But Junior Hoilett taking on number 11, another great number as well, will be joining the Vancouver Whitecaps. Alex, I mean, from the Whitecaps perspective, has there been a better transfer window? I mean, Richie Laryea, Sam Adekugbe, Junior Hoilett, especially from the Canadian side of things. But what does getting a player like Hoilett on top of who you've already signed with Adekugbe and Laryea mean to the fan base and I guess just the city of Vancouver?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good because you look as well on the other side, Sergio Cordova's cleared out after less than a full season. I was pretty ruthless, and I don't think that sort of ruthlessness has been seen from the Caps before. Even Julian Gressel, instead of maybe waiting around and risking losing him for nothing, they got some key money back that allowed them to make some of these moves. So overall, it's been a lot of moving, and I think Hoilett's a good final piece because you bring him in as a free agent. It's a very low-risk move, especially they've signed him through the end of 2023, so there's no commitment for next year. It can kind of be like a prove-it deal. Like Hoilett, obviously didn't get anything pen to paper in England. There's links in the championship with Huddersfield, but never, emerged there. So this is kind of a prove it. Like, all right, you have 6 games in a playoff to go show that, you can be worth it and valuable to bring back next year. If not, I mean, it's a risk-free transaction for the Whitecaps, especially now. It really allows them to load up for the playoffs. Like, right, like they're bringing in someone who can help them. Cordova, of course, off the bench was an option, but that's a DP striker that was sitting on the bench. Now you open up a DP spot for the offseason, plus you replace him with someone in Hoilett who is used to that super sub role with Canada, for example, where he's come off the bench and done well. So you can bring comfort in knowing that, okay, if you need to spell Gauld in games, if you need a start from Hoilett, he also can bring you that and offer you a bit of versatility in that regard.
Absolutely. I can't wait to dive a little bit more into this, but quickly, we're going to go to the chat, guys. So if you're joining us, drop a like on the stream and comment down below what do you rate this transfer out of 10? It was a bit of a surprise to me. Again, we will get into it, but Barca Boys already here saying solid 8 out of 10. We got a Vancouver Whitecaps, got another great player. Caps are legit. Whitecaps looking low-key decent. A lot of excitement, and this is a comment I want to focus on as we move on. Another 8 out of 10, which I'd say 8.5 to 9 out of 10. I think it's a great signing, but this is what makes me excited is that it makes the fans excited. This is awesome. So glad I have season tickets. This is exactly what you want. And Alex, I want to go before we really dive into like Hoilett and how he fits into this team. Do you think that there's a model here of maybe looking ahead at the 2026 World Cup that's obviously going to be co-hosted in Canada? And do you think that's why maybe they're being very ambitious, the Whitecaps, and bringing in this Canadian talent? And it's not just fringe players. I mean, Junior Hoilett is, one of the most experienced Canadian players out there. Still has a chance, I believe, to go to the World Cup in 2026. On top of that, you had Sam Adekugbe and Richie Laryea, who you could argue are in their prime. 3 high-piece Canadian players coming into the Whitecaps. Coincidence or some type of bigger plan?
I think it's, obviously it's part of a plan. I think it's nice because I think back to what Axel Schuster said back in 2021, I want to say it was. I mean, I interviewed him, funnily enough, and he was like, yeah, we want to be the athletic Bilbao of Canada. And then since then, all that, we've seen of the 3 Canadian teams, TFC had their, entry of Marc-Anthony Kaye, you retained Jonathan Osorio, you had all the Richie Laryea, you had all these Canadians, and then you looked at Montreal. I mean, Montreal was killing it. They have been killing it. They're regularly starting 6 to 7 Canadians every game. You got Waterman, you got Saliba, Chouanier, Piet now. Last year you had Johnston, Kone. So it kind of felt like the Whitecaps, they said this athletic Bilbao of Canada, yet you could argue that was Montreal. I think this really sets the foundation, especially in terms of the veteran presence, because the Whitecaps have a good academy. We've looked into that. And there's some interesting players coming up, but now there's some Canadian talent who are in their primes, like you mentioned, or like Hoilett, still in a good age at 33, where he's still, as we've seen over the last year, I think he's still got a fair amount in the tank, that are offering you, Canadian talent that can mentor this next generation, that can help bring them through. Plus, from a marketing standpoint, those are national team players that have played at a World Cup. Players that have played at some top clubs, like in Hoilett's case, and he's played in the Premier League. Adekugbe, played in the Turkish Super League. Laryea played in the Championship, was contracted to a Premier League club. So it's good both from the marketing standpoint, it's good from mentoring, and it's good just because, they're in their prime, they're Canadians, they're domestic. That frees you to go after more young South American talent, for example, as the Whitecaps have done a lot of, to complement these sorts of players. So it ticks off a lot of boxes on a lot of fronts.
It's really exciting. Let me know, guys, in the chat. I don't know if there's a lot of FIFA players out there, but Junior Hoilett always has a special place in my heart, because way back in the day when I used to play FIFA, he was one of the few cards that were actually usable. I mean, I remember the one year, like the Turkish league wasn't even in one of the FIFAs, so there was no Atiba. But when Hoilett decided to commit over, it was such a good memory for me. So it's kind of cool to see it come full circle, where he is coming to Canada to play. And I don't think he's coming here to sit on the bench, Alex. I think he's coming to, like you said, prove what he can do. This is a player that I know that there was rumors out there, like we mentioned Huddersfield, but I mean, Reading wanted him again. I know that's League One, but I'm sure he could have stayed in the Championship. But instead, he comes back home. He goes to Vancouver, and I want to move on quickly to see where you expect him to fit. So I put up a starting 11, and this is the first little game we're going to play here. And in the chat, guys, let us know as well when I bring up the starting 11 we're going to build. Let me know where you'd like to see Hoilett played, and where do you think he's best? Because Alex, he's featured a lot as a wing back. I don't personally think that's his best position, but he's featured a lot as a wing back for Reading over the years. He's played as a second striker for Canada, which I think you can get a lot of that creative spark out of him through the middle as a 10 out wide. Quickly right now, Alex, where do you think his best position is, and where do you think he's most likely to play for the Whitecaps?
Yeah, I think his best position's probably somewhere like a second striker, number 10, because I don't think he's an out-and-out number 10. I just don't think he's much of an out-and-out winger anymore. He cuts in a lot anyways, and he's as he's grown older, he's gained a lot of his awareness in central channels, his hip movement, all those sorts of little details have made him a lot more comfortable playing centrally. So I think for these Whitecaps, I think they see him, what they've been playing a lot lately has been like a 3-5-2, with the front two basically being a bit of a mismatch front two, with White playing more as a traditional 9 and then Gauld playing as a second striker. So I think I'd see him in that Gauld role, where Gauld just plays everywhere. If Gauld wants to go in the wing, he goes in the wing. If he wants to play up front, he goes up front. If he wants to drop deeper, he drops deeper. And I think Hoilett can kind of do a lot of those things, because I see he has winger attributes. He doesn't maybe have the speed he used to in the day, but he still can take guys on 1v1 and cut inside. So I like that. He can play centrally, like I mentioned, with all those other attributes. He can create, he can score. I think a kind of free role like that would suit him. So obviously, we'll see if how much he ends up pushing Gauld. Maybe he helps rest Gauld a bit ahead of the playoff run, but definitely I can see them kind of competing for that position where, maybe he can come off the bench for Gauld, or even he can pair with Gauld in a similar role like that.
Yeah, I was assuming the pair. I put together this 4-3-2-1 system, and kind of like you're speaking to, under the striker alongside Gauld is where I imagined him. But the activity we're going to do today, Alex, is you're going to build a starting 11, but you have to put in Hoilett, Laryea, and Adekugbe just for fun. So I want you to think about it for a second. I'm going to go through some of the comments here. But yeah, a lot of excitement, and that's what you want to see. I mean, I know that there's the narrative of Canadians leaving Europe to come back to Major League Soccer. Alex and I have talked about that in length when Adekugbe and Laryea came back. I think that, there's arguments that they could have found homes in Europe, but the situation and everything that Adekugbe went through in Turkey, it made sense, as well did the Laryea. I mean, Laryea had a really bad experience over in Europe, and I mean, he went back to a TFC side that just, wasn't ready to compete. And unfortunately for him, now he had to move on, and he found a home in Canada that is able to compete. And at Junior's age, at 33, again, I don't think that there's an issue. I think MLS is a growing league. I think that, he still could have done it in the championship level, but it doesn't bother me from the national team perspective if Hoilett played for Huddersfield or if he played for the Whitecaps. As long as he's playing, delivering, and showing his qualities on the pitch, then that's exactly what you want to see. So I'm excited for him to come there. And a lot of you guys in the chat are as well. We got a 9 out of 10, great skill set and character. I did see a comment on Twitter that I thought was hilarious. I think Vincent kind of touched on it, but I think it was something like, oh, the Whitecaps taking the Bill Manning plan of signing Richie Laryea and Hoilett, bringing him back home. So that gave me a crack up. And Ted saying Whitecaps coverage, Josh paying attention now that TFC have imploded. Now, guys, in my defense, I've seen this a couple times of you guys telling me to cover the Whitecaps. I love covering the Whitecaps. I almost worked for the Whitecaps Academy, so don't pretend that I'm not noticing. I love talking about this team. This is definitely the team to watch right now in Canada, along with Montreal. And like you mentioned, Alex, for the Bilbao of Canada. Would you say they started 7 Quebecers in one of the matches? 6 Quebecers. So I mean that is very impressive. That's as close as it comes. But no, I absolutely love the Whitecaps, and that's why we're covering them today. So hopefully you guys are enjoying it as well. So let's start off, Alex. Do you like the system I picked for you to try to fit all 3 of those Canadian studs in this lineup, or would you prefer something else like Ken is suggesting, the 3-5-2?
Well, I think basically what I'd see is what I think the Whitecaps are going to play. They're going to keep the 3-5-2. What I think is their best formation at the moment, it appears to be the 3-5-2. But if we are going to play, if we're going to get everyone in, like you say, then it is a 4-3-2-1. So we can build the 4-3-2-1 for fun and then build the 3-5-2 and kind of see what that looks like, or we can do vice versa. I think that's probably the reasonable way to go about it.
Beautiful. Well, I got the 4-3-2-1 up, so give me your back 4. And if you're in the chat, play along and let me know what you guys think that this team should look like if you're fitting in the 3 Canadians.
Well, I think it's Laryea, Veselinovic, Blackman, and Adekugbe. No nonsense.
No nonsense. All right. So let me just get these in here. All right, I think that matches his number. I'm gonna get the numbers in as well. Laryea.
Blackman there. Mr. Richie Laryea, the 7 now. Hoilett, the 11. 7-11.
Can't say I love the number 7, but I will get over it with Richie.
That has to be a joke if Hoilett and Laryea both play on the right side, and if they're always wide open, they'll just the 7-11 duo open 24/7.
I like it. Now,
I got to give Blackman a number 6 jersey.
I do. Should have maybe prepped this a little bit better before, but there we go. All right, we got our back 4 figured out nicely. As we move on to the midfield, Alex, give me your midfield 3.
I think it's Andres Cubas holding down the 6. That's a no-brainer. This one's a big debate that's been had in Whitecaps land. There's no easy answer. I think personally, if we're going for just all-out attacking lineup, it's Ali Ahmed and Pedro Vite, but Alessandro Schopf is right in that mix. But for this one, let's go Ahmed as well. That's another Canadian, so we can get up to that would be 4 Canadians, potential internationals, all in a starting lineup for the Whitecaps, building up towards that Bilbao model, I guess.
I remember, it was not that long ago, Alex, you and I talked about how they started a couple matches without any Canadians. Do you remember that? That was not that long ago. So quite the turnaround. And on top of it, high quality players that they brought in that are Canadian, and someone like Ali Ahmed, who, I'm expecting big things from for the national team. Hopefully one day a move to Europe. He's a very exciting talent, and that is a dangerous looking midfield, which leaves the front.
Give Ahmed his number 22. So
did I not do that yet? Where am I? Where's Ahmed? I'll give him 20.
Double 20s.
Oh, no. There we go. All right. Now the front 3, which, like he kind of mentioned, probably writes itself, but you can let the chat know who it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's if in this case, for this hypothetical, it's Junior Hoilett, it's Ryan Gauld, it's Brian White. We can call this lineup the "you need a goal," and I don't know. This can be the fun, all-out attack lineup, say. Because again, like we mentioned, we know it's a 3-5-2, like Ken has mentioned, and we'll build a 3-5-2. But for fun's sake, we can build this 4-3-2-1.
There it is. All right, chat. What do you think of that starting 11? I don't know how well you can hopefully see it, but I mean, it's exciting. If they're down 1-0 or so at halftime, right? There could be some adjustments where you could see this excitement, but a lot of quality on that pitch, Alex. And I mean, I hope we could see something like this maybe against a team like Toronto at the weekend. Maybe. I mean, I doubt Hoylett's going to feature, but
or maybe in the second half or something like that. I mean, I don't know where Hoilett's at, but
oh, I like that. Spicy. It is spicy. At number 9, Gregory Vandervelde. That also bugged me emotionally, but dang, yeah, the back line does look good, but I'm liking it. I'm liking it. But we're gonna go on to quickly another conversation before we build that 3-5-2. And this is the conversation I do like. And Alex, we had it before. We will have it again. But not a fan of guys in their mid to late 20s returning to MLS when European opportunities are available. Shows a lack of ambition. Now, I get that a lot. So let's first focus on Hoilett and why we think he's coming back. So Alex, I don't think I really asked you it. What do you think went into his decision about maybe rejecting opportunity? Let's just say he had a couple offers in the championship. What do you think went behind the decision to, leave somewhere where he's obviously comfortable with in England and come back to Canada and pick the Whitecaps?
Yeah, I feel like it's an interesting one for him because he's kind of always flirted with MLS. So there's obviously been an intrigue to go to the league, try out the league. Obviously, as a domestic, he was going to have a lot of appeal to any of the 3 Canadian teams. So I imagine this isn't the first time he'd fielded a call from a Canadian MLS team. And I wonder for him as well, like the championship's also a grind. And last season in particular, it was rough for injuries just because it's a 48-game season. You're playing like every 3 days at points. You had in the cups and everything. Especially where you're getting up there in age, it's not an easy grind. And I wonder if that, especially that last season where you deal with the double of injury, relegation, and everything, it's kind of something where at 33, you may as well come to MLS. And I think at the same time, it's not, MLS isn't the same retirement league, quote unquote. I use that because like sarcastically that it was 5-10 years ago. Like this is something where he's going to have to come and put up the similar standard to what he showed in the championship. I think a great example is that of someone like another Canadian like Scott Arfield going to Charlotte. He's had to settle for being a super sub, and he's done well in that role. But it shows that someone like Arfield would have walked into most starting 11s in MLS 5 years ago, and he was obviously a different role. I think obviously Hoilett is probably ahead where Arfield was at this point by a good margin, but still, that's just an example of how much the league has changed, that these guys that coming in their mid-30s, it is a different challenge. So for Hoilett, I think it made sense. So you kind of always wondered when he'd try MLS, and I think this was a good opportunity for him to bring a different quality to the league. Like I'm curious to see how he does, because maybe he's not the physical specimen that thrives in MLS, but he's got a bit of quality, a bit of class about him. So I'm curious to see how he fares, but in that regard.
It's a tough narrative to completely kick that MLS is a retirement league, but if you look at like Almeida, he won the World Cup. He was the first MLS player to win the World Cup. He will be moving on from Major League Soccer eventually to go to Europe. There's a lot of like Ricky Pugh out in LA Galaxy. Like he had some options as well. Like there's a lot of quality in this league. And you have someone like Leo Messi, also attracting probably some young South American players that want the opportunity to come over here. But like this is a fun league. It's a growing league, and I don't think the narrative of leaving Europe it depends on what league it is that you're leaving to come to Major League Soccer. Because Liam Fraser is a great example, leaving the second division in Belgium to MLS. I think is a step up, and I will say that through and through. I don't think there's any debate around it. I think the championship is a great league. But like you said, Alex, it's a grueling league. And when you're 33 and maybe when you still got a sneaky little eye for that 2026 World Cup, it could play into the factor. Do you think the World Cup had any impact on Hoilett? Do you think that maybe, managing minutes, playing closer to home has anything to do with that decision at all?
Yeah, I think because another thing that stood out to me was, I don't have the exact number, maybe it's on the Whitecaps Twitter, but something that really stood out to me as well when they announced him was the amount of games he has on his legs. Like it was something like he's already played over like 400 games for club and country.
559.
That
I had it up here. Let me
that's absurd. That's absurd for, because he didn't really like, I feel like that's over the last like 10, 11, 12 years. But yeah, I mean, wow. So like, again, just I wonder if, it's like the MLS season is pretty grueling, 34 games plus Leagues Cup plus Champions Cup if you're the Whitecaps, Canadian Championship, etc. But yeah, the English schedule is such a slog. And also I do wonder, I think we're going to see this. I think this is kind of like hypothetical, but I base this kind of off of some of the very outlandish Christian Pulisic speculation that was out there this summer, of course, when he was looking for a new club. I think MLS is gunning to bring these sorts of players in because, look, North America is hosting a men's World Cup in 2026. It would be good for especially from the American standpoint, MLS. They created MLS off the back of what happened in '94. They hosted a men's World Cup. There was all this interest in the sport. They built the men's league, MLS, and they've been growing it ever since. I think now is kind of a full circle moment where you now have had these milestones like Almada winning a World Cup as part of an MLS team. You've seen the Davises move on, the Almirons, John Duran, Gaga Slolina. You got Georgi Petrovic could be about to start for Chelsea after playing for the Revolution this year. I think now in 3 years, if you're going in Canada and US, go make a run at that World Cup, and most of their squad's made up of MLS. For MLS, that could be a sign of, look, like this league is here to stay. And okay, maybe it's not the top 5 leagues. Okay, like likes of Pulisic are going to stay in those top 5 leagues. Musa, McKennie, you go to Canada, Davies, David, they're going to play in the top 5 leagues. But elsewise, the MLS can compete with the likes of the Belgium league. Okay, maybe not Bruges or the teams at the top, but certainly a lot of the other teams. You look at Turkey, you can compete with especially teams not in the big 3, etc. So I think for MLS, this is another chance for bringing these sorts of signings home. Can show that especially if you're North American, unless you're going to a top 5 league or one of the top clubs outside of the top 5 leagues, that it might be better off just staying in MLS, especially because, to the Belgian league argument, you're playing more competitive games across the entirety of a season because of the parity in MLS versus Belgian league, where sometimes you have top games and sometimes you're thrashing a team at the bottom 8-0, right? Or 5-0 or something along those lines. So I think those are the sorts of things that are going into these sorts of Canadians coming home.
No, it's a fair point. We've seen it across. I'm trying to think now how long ago it was. Like when I'm looking at the American perspective when these Americans were basically playing. It wasn't even that long ago. It was I'm pretty sure it was playing under Greg. Some of the Americans that were getting called in were from Major League Soccer. When any American that was playing overseas was, from the fan perspective, should have been in the starting 11 from the start, like right from the beginning. They didn't like that Major League Soccer was getting these players that constantly got called up. And maybe the trickle down effect to the Canadians when we didn't have so many players over in Europe, that it was like when one was over there, they should automatically be in. But like you said, Alex, I don't think that's always the case. There's certain leagues that absolutely higher quality, but like I said, Liam Fraser is a perfect example. As he took that opportunity to go to Europe, didn't get that promotion. He's got stuck in the Belgium second division. It's not high enough quality. It's not better quality than Major League Soccer. And what happened a few years later after a tough spell there, he comes back to Major League Soccer. And also adding the fact that like someone like Messi's coming here, all you got to go do is go to Major League Soccer on YouTube and take a look at what their views are per video. Like any highlights with Inter Miami are getting millions of views. Like they're building interest. They're building a pretty good reputation that's bringing over some younger players as well to help, just make this league all around stronger. But I do like where Atal is going here. And he said he had no problem with Junior Hoilett, and I don't either. I think, like me and Alex just talked about, there's definite reasons why he'd want to come over here, especially at the age. But now let's move over to Adekugbe, but let's mostly talk about Laryea, I think, because as Vincent said, Adekugbe's situation is understandable. Yes, he's 28. He's playing, in my opinion, a good league in Turkey. He had that spell with Galatasaray. I don't know where he might have ended up if he stayed in Turkey, but he wanted to go home. He went through an event that, I can't even try to understand it. It's very difficult. But someone like Richie Laryea, who did want to go to Europe, that was his ambition. He went over. He didn't get the opportunities with Nottingham Forest. Ended up getting loaned back out. I'm assuming, I don't know, I'm assuming there's probably some options somewhere in Europe that Richie could have gone. And then this is the point that Atal wants to make. So I'm going to try to reword it a little bit for you, but he says it sets a bad example for younger Canadians like Ahmed, who, instead of moving abroad, could be stuck behind these more established players. So I don't 100% agree with that at all, but I think it does. Maybe if like someone like Hoilett or Richie or Adekugbe are coming back home and are still getting called up from whoever the new manager is, could show some younger players, hey, I don't even have to make the jump abroad if I don't want to. I'll still get called up because these players that are, coming back from Europe are getting called up. You kind of get what I'm saying there, Alex? Do you agree with that? Do you think we'll have any impact, these players coming back home, on any Canadians who are looking to move to Europe?
I think it depends on your perspective, because I think the Laryea one is, there's layers to it. I think because what it shows is both the good and bad of Europe. Because of course you're Laryea, he's dominant at the right back position, one of the best in MLS, and he rejected an offer to be the highest paid fullback in MLS to go test himself in Europe. He goes to Nottingham Forest, a great jump, and just look how unlucky it was for him. Like he goes, like it was, the plan was like, take the first half season, find your feet, you become a starter the second season. Well, he in the first season he shows well. He doesn't, he only plays like 7 games, like about 100 minutes, shows well, but his team gets promoted. Next he's a Premier League player, and then all of a sudden you're kind of stuck in a weird situation where, yeah, but he was good enough for last year's team, but you go up to the Premier League, you invest in the squad so you don't get, you avoid relegation as they did, and then Laryea was caught in no man's land. And I think what that shows is, and again, another parallel is the Fraser situation, where he wanted the gamble that Laryea took, where he wanted to go to a second division and then get promoted. Or you look at some of the other scenarios we've seen with Canadians, you have to be careful with the moves you make to Europe, because it's one thing to go to Europe and there's examples of players thriving. I think Derek Cornelius is a good example. Like he's made some good moves to Europe, and now he's really thrived for it. And there's, I think there's some other players you can point to. Yeah, Johnston is doing great, But then even on the flip side of it, I mean, it's been it's a bit of a mixed one. But Ismail Kone's stint at Watford has been all over just because of the club he's at. I mean, of course, Kone is more than fine. He's been playing, and again, that's not to say it's been terrible so far. I think he's been growing, which is important. I think Kone, again, the nice thing about the Watford system is that he could head to Udinese. He's going to attract links elsewhere. But for example, just look at the fact that Kone, he hasn't been there for a year. He's had 4 managers or whatever it is, 3 managers. Like those are the sorts of things that you sometimes run into in Europe. So all of this long-winded to say that someone like Laryea could serve to an example of Ahmed as well, that you have to be careful when you head to Europe. That now you can't just head to Europe just to head there. That if you're not going to the right situation, one where they're going to take care of your development, if you're going to look at long-term things, you could end up in a bit of a weird limbo that Laryea was in, where he was too good for MLS but not good enough for the Premier League, and you're just kind of bouncing around loan to loan, figuring out where you end up, right? So it shows that you have to be careful.
No, I 100% agree. I think you worded that really well, because, and even talking about Kone going to Watford, having 4 managers, managers don't last long in Europe. It doesn't matter what league it is, like unless you're someone like Pep or Klopp or someone like that. But there's a lot of turnover, especially not in the top flight. Tajon Buchanan is another great example, but he's a player who never, despite having I think 4 or so managers, it never really affected his game time. He was always a part of the starting 11 for Club Brugge. He's going to be playing in European football. Where Kone had kind of the opposite effect. He had a decent start, and now with the new manager coming in, Kone's kind of on the outside as a sub player looking in instead of starting week in, week out, which is what you kind of want to do when you head that way. So you're right. There's a lot of different layers, a lot of different circumstances that can make a move successful. I think there was a little bit of disappointment though when Richie didn't get the opportunity in maybe a league like Belgium or the Netherlands, or a good team in a league that'd be competing in the Champions League, like a Celtic, Rangers. I think that's what a lot of Canadian fans were maybe hoping for. But I'm excited to see him come back home like this, especially when he teams up with someone like Adekugbe, teams up with an Ahmed, teams up with Hoilett. I mean, all national team players, all very exciting. And, it doesn't mean that if he doesn't finish the season strong, he can't go somewhere else. But
I mean, to add to the point with Laryea too, I think it's also interesting from his perspective. He went to Europe, right, beginning of 2022. And he wasn't playing much for Nottingham. I don't know if you remember, because at that point he was a nailed-on starter for the CanMNT. He came back and he was starting still because, again, he's important off the ball, but he was very rusty. I don't know if you remember. I think it was that March window. He had some very rusty performances.
I remember, and he also, I think he played, I don't know the stat off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure he started played like 9 minutes in the first 6 or 7 matches that Nottingham had since they joined him. Like he got almost nothing.
Yeah, so he was really rusty. And then later that year, he joins a terrible TFC team, right? TFC finished, second last in 2022? Yet at the World Cup, just because he was starring for TFC and playing well, he was phenomenal at the World Cup. He went up against Belgium and was one of Canada's best players on the field. And he had a very good World Cup. And it shows. It's almost like being on the bench of a good European team versus being a star of a bad MLS team seemed to help him more personally. So I'd also, again, to the point, it shows that ultimately, I think the biggest thing at the end of the day is going to a club where you're going to get regular minutes and you're going to get regular form. And I think that's honestly starting to become the most important thing versus club, et cetera. Of course, if you're Ali Ahmed at the Whitecaps and you're playing regularly, and then an offer comes in from a team like, I don't know, we'll just throw a random one out there, like a Ligue 1 team, right? Like a Ligue 1 team comes and says you're going to play. Okay, take that move. You're going to a top 5 league. That's a jump up. But if you're in a similar situation, a mid-table Belgian club comes and, that maybe there's not the guarantee that you play right away either, could lead you to be like, oh, well, I'm playing regularly at Vancouver. I'm in the national team. It also shows that, especially now with the growth of MLS, it isn't that gap isn't as big of a deal, especially if you're the star on an MLS team. If you're leaving that, it would have to be for an opportunity where you're playing regularly, because if not, it can really derail your momentum.
Yeah, it's a really fun debate. Atal, excellent question, and I don't disagree with you at all. I think in hindsight, any younger player, or even if you're in your later 20s, I guess you should try to stay in Europe as long as you can. But there are exceptions to the rule, and I think you can make an argument for all three of the Canadians who came back home to Vancouver that there's a reason why they did it, all for very different reasons as well. But I do want to put the biggest point I think Alex and I are trying to make as well is that MLS is a good league. It is. There's nothing wrong with playing in that league, and to move on from it, or to return to it, you need to either go to a place where you're getting better competition and you're getting opportunities, or you're leaving a situation where just maybe wasn't good enough. The grass is greener on the other side. But Alex, this is the number one question I actually wanted to ask you today. Out of the 3 Canadian signings that got brought in, Laryea, Adekugbe, Hoilett, the project of whatever was pitched to them to try to get them to come back to Canada, who do you think took the most convincing and why?
I'd probably say Laryea, because I think for Adekugbe, I mean, again, it's a chance to return home, where you're homegrown. You can kind of tell he signed the longer term deal. He took a bit of a pay cut, like Axel Schuster mentioned. Like, this is obviously a special time for him to come and push for silverware. And then as for Hoilett, it's very much a prove me contract, right? Like, for him, it's something where maybe in this case the options weren't very there. Like, the roster freeze deadline is tomorrow, by the way. So like, if he wasn't getting a deal, this is an MLS. So if he wasn't getting a deal in MLS, he could have to wait till October, November to sign in England, maybe if a team picked up injuries. So it made sense for him to want to sign now. For Laryea, I think it was probably one where, especially, and I don't think that process is done because he's on loan. Like, they're still going to have to convince, all parties to make this work in the off season. Again, if Sergio Cordova is indeed on the way out, that's going to make things a lot easier. With the spot it opens up on the roster, and the flexibility his departure would bring. But that Laryea one, because Adekugbe is already there long term, that one's sorted. Hoilett, this is to prove it. If he's going to have to prove that he can, if the Whitecaps are going to sign him for another year or two, he's going to have to prove what he can bring over the next few months. Whereas Laryea, I think the Whitecaps would obviously want him to return, but the fact that he's on loan shows that process remains ongoing.
Our boy Atal is making us think, Alex, today. I mean, this point is kind of interesting. So the point that Atal is making is that these Canadian players coming back home are taking opportunities away from younger Canadians. And where I didn't think that the Adekugbe one was totally fair for Ahmed, because I think Ahmed is more of a midfielder, and that's where I think he's at his best. And I don't really want to imagine that he's losing his position. But I get what you're saying is because he has featured as a wing back before for the Whitecaps, but I picture him as like an 8. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. I know he can play out on the wings and he's a wing back, and we've seen him do it before, but I don't imagine that. I mean, anyways, but the point he's making for the Richie one, which I think is true. When Laryea came back, he definitely took opportunities away from a couple other young Canadians. JMR's one, Franklin, like Thompson when he was there. So do you kind of get his point there, of these Canadians maybe coming back home and taking other opportunities away? Because obviously there are a lot more Canadians on Canadian-based MLS teams than there are the US-based ones.
I'd say it's circumstantial because because in the Franklin and JMR and Antonoglu case at TFC, I mean, Franklin has certainly proven his value, so you could argue for Franklin, but like Marshall Rudy and Antonoglu, I mean, we haven't seen enough of Antonoglu, but for Marshall Rudy, inconsistency has been an issue. Because he's had some great performances and there's been some inconsistency from his part. It's hard to say that Laryea was taking away, opportunities. And I think there's a flip side to it. And I think a good example is Ryan Raposo at the Whitecaps, because ever since Laryea and Adekugbe has come in, Raposo's game has hit a whole other level. Like for him, and it's been interesting to ask him about it, because he's been very candid. He's like, look, like, yeah, I mean, I could see why. Like, I could take this as a threat. Like, Laryea and Adekugbe are coming in. I was a starter. Now I'm not a starter. But also the way he said it, he's like, but look, these are two national team players. I want to be a national team player. I get to prove now every week in training, in games, against guys who are national team players and what it takes to be national team players. So I think there's also, you can make an argument that if the player has the right attitude about going about it, like Raposo has, that can also elevate your game and push. And maybe it ends up helping Raposo in the future, because his contract's up at the end of this year. Say Laryea and Adekugbe stick around. Maybe for him, he could be like, well, look, I've proven now that I can be a borderline national team player. Maybe another club in MLS can take a punt on me, and then I can further prove it and really do that. Or you can stay and keep pushing someone like an Adekugbe, like a Laryea. So I think there's also that sort of argument you can make, that for some of these young Canadians, this is a chance to go up directly against those who you want to be in the future and compete. And if you're not, of course, to a certain extent, if they're standing in the way of guys breaking through, I think that's a different argument. And maybe you could argue that for Franklin based on how good he's been. But even then, Franklin was playing this year with Laryea. Like when Franklin, and Franklin's a good example of what this can do. Like Franklin pushed Laryea, and what did they do? They found a way to put both of them in the lineup, and it ends up benefiting both, that Franklin has had that chance to learn. So I don't know. I wouldn't disagree. I wouldn't agree with the take to say that they're taking away minutes, because I think if they are, maybe that's also up on the player to respond to that. And I don't think there's any case where I'm looking at these like, oh, these guys took away talent. I think more talent only helps those underneath push and want to get to that next level.
Yeah, it's a fun take, Atal. I appreciate you making us think. But I would agree more so with you, Alex. It's just the fact that, I mean, if you have the right attitude, you got to push and you got to get better. And I mean, it's also from the team perspective, like Will's saying here, all good teams need depth, like it's not, you don't just have 11 players playing week in, week out. You need players in probably more than one player in each position to keep pushing on. So, but it's a fair take. I get what you're saying. And I think the idea comes from the fact that I want our best Canadian players playing in Europe. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that take at all. And sometimes it rubs some fans the wrong way when you're seeing someone in their mid-20s coming back to Canada. So, I mean, I get it. It's a fun debate, but I mean, speaking of depth now, Alex, I think it's time to turn on to the standings that I just brought up here. I'm assuming Vancouver is not doing all this because, they're going to be satisfied with a first round exit. I think they're going all in. And when you look at the standings here, they've already had a pretty good season. Now the tricky part is because, Adekugbe and Laryea are still relatively new. Now you have Hoilett in there. How do you think Vanny's going to be able to manage their minutes, build chemistry, keep the players, like you said, like the Raposos and Ahmeds, happy with their minutes and keep building towards this playoff push? Are you worried at all that it could, disrupt the balance?
No, because I think that's one thing that Vanny has been good at since day one in 2021 is getting the most out of his whole roster. Like, I think that's something that since 2021, it's been clear that he likes using his whole roster and he likes using those available. I think it's shown even since he's come in. Like, Raposos keep playing well. So Raposo's been getting starts, and that's been good because that's allowed Adekugbe to get up to full speed. It's allowed Laryea to not, to get up to full speed. And you've seen it, guys like, Andres Cubas dealing with some knocks. Seb Berhalter's in right away in midfield. And, he's been rotating his 3/8s between Shop, Ahmed, and Vite, keeping them all fresh. And I think he's done, Vanny Sartini's done a good job of rotating through his 11. So I don't really have any issues on that front, and that's good. I mean, you can kind of ask the question, like, what are things going to look like by playoff time? Will he be able to settle on a best 11? I think so, because he's also shown with the 3-5-2 that 4 big games we've mostly seen, like the likes of Adekugbe, Laryea, Blackman, Veselinovic, either Brown or Laborda. You've seen Takaoka, you've seen Gauld, White. Like, you can probably write out most of the big game 11. So I think it's been a good mix of getting guys their minutes and keeping them in form, and keeping, especially using guys off the bench as well has been an asset, while also, finding a best 11. So I think as long as he keeps that balance going, it'll be good because it'll allow them to push for push for a top 4 spot. Because I mean, if you look at the standings, there's every chance for them to finish top 4, and they're going to need their depth because their schedule, for example, over the next week is TFC away on the Saturday, Houston away on the Wednesday, RSL away on the next Saturday. Then the next week, I think it's Colorado away in midweek, and then it's DC at home. Like, that's a terrible stretch of games. So they're going to need their depth. But then, as we see, they have the quality that when it comes to playoff time, they can put out a good 11, have guys off the bench, and have that sort of depth.
You gave me the perfect transition into finally building what you think is the best starting 11, Alex. We talked about a fun starting 11 earlier where we'd see Adekugbe, Laryea, and Hoilett on. And before we even started streaming here, Alex kind of gave me a little, maybe Hoilett's not going to be in the starting 11. So it's up to you now. This is a one-off game coming up. Try to build me your best starting 11 system. Walk me through it. How would you want to see the Whitecaps line up in your eyes?
Yeah, well, I think the 3-5-2 just has made the most sense based on what we've seen. I think the 3-5-2 is nice. It gives them that width of the wing backs. I think Adekugbe's really loved it so far, Laryea as well. And then allows you to play Gauld higher up the field. Because the problem is with Gauld, it's not a problem. He works too hard. But the thing is, when you play him as an 8, as he was earlier in the season, he drops back too deep and is doing too much defending, which, again, for someone as talented offensively as him, it's kind of almost like, stay up the field. We want you getting on the ball and doing those sorts of things. So I think this 3-5-2 allows Gauld to play higher up. And then also it just gives a bit of a load off the defenders having that third defender back there. So I think 3-5-2, to be honest, I think it's most of the starters stay in. It's just you're swapping out Hoilett for another defender personally, and using Hoilett as more of a super sub, which honestly, given his lack of fitness, makes sense to build up Hoilett for the playoffs and get his fitness back, because he hasn't played that much since May.
All right. Is it making it almost look right now? Is that it?
Yeah, we just have to swatch the center back.
And what's your back 3 in order?
It would be Veselinovic has been playing in the middle. Blackman's been playing on the left, and it's really between Brown and Laborde on the right. I mean, based on recent performances, it would be Brown. But I mean, there's also a chance it's Laborde if he figures things out. But he's been a bit aggressive in recent games.
Hey, Alex, this is your team, my man. This is a tough decision. You're picking Brown. Is that your guy?
I think I'd be based on recent form. We'll go Brown because he's just been more consistent off the ball.
Look at that. A Canadian star, someone that I've enjoyed for so many years on the national team, coming back home, and Alex has got him riding the pine. Oh,
hey, imagine bringing on for 30 minutes of Junior, though. That's going to be that's a good proposition.
No, it's fair. It's still a very strong starting 11, and it goes back to the comment that we saw earlier. All good teams need depth. This is a big late push for the playoffs. He's a special player that can come on later in the match that can make a difference, and you can also play him in different positions. Like, just because I put up that 4-3-2-1, we put him as kind of like a dual 10. You can maybe toss him on a wing back. Like somehow if you move it around. I don't know if maybe Richie comes off. I don't know if it's gonna be Richie coming off, but you know what I mean. Like, he can play that role. He's a very versatile player, and it's exciting as well. But I did get a question in the chat for you, Alex. Where'd it go? On the striker depth during this heavy final schedule. Sean Hundle signing. A player that Alex and I were actually discussing a little earlier today. But walk me through the Whitecaps striker depth.
Yeah, I mean, with assuming Sergio Cordova departs, which the writing seems to be on the wall for that one, it is a bit thin. But I mean, Simon Betcher has shown that he can score in limited minutes. The thing is, the only issue is that he's I mean, it's not an issue. He scores, but then in terms of, and he makes great runs, but in terms of hold-up play and that, he maybe doesn't offer you much. But I think Betcher can be a good super sub. I think it would open up minutes for Levante Johnson as well, who's been good. And it's just, there's been so much logjam up front that he's had to play out at wing back, which isn't his natural position. Then you add in Hoilett, who can play as the second striker. I think there's enough options. Maybe there's a lack of a true out and out number 9 that can do what Brian White does, because I don't think Betcher offers the same. So I think it's something where you're gonna have to hope White's minutes are managed with no Cordova, but also I think Betcher should be able to supplement him enough, I think, over the next stretch. But we'll see. Because as I mentioned, it's a very busy stretch, so the Whitecaps are going to have to be careful.
I've got a funny comment here saying that now that Gressel's gone, you can bring over Hundle and no fisticuffs going on over there. But all right, Alex, we got about 15 minutes left in the stream. Let's dive in a little bit to the playoff picture, because the Whitecaps, I mean, I'm assuming a title like this would mean so much to the city, to the club. But I want you to maybe dive in a little bit deeper. Why do you think that this could be the season that something really special happens? It's a gruel. We've seen what it meant to the city of Toronto when TFC were able to do it. Obviously, TFC look far from a team that will ever be able to compete. I love watching CF Montreal. I've really enjoyed them over the past few years, seeing so much Canadian talent come through. They never really looked like they could do it in playoffs. Even when they finished second, it just seemed like there was something, like they were going to hit a stopgap. So tell me why you think the Whitecaps have a really legitimate opportunity this season to push on for that title.
I think because they finally have ticked all the boxes you need to compete in MLS. I think first and foremost, as we've seen, they've got a star, like a DP. I think that's something where if you look across the playoffs the last few years, every team has seemingly had that guy that can step up. And I think Gauld's been that. Like he's been playing at an MVP level. They finally got consistency at the number 9, despite underperforming his XG by like almost 3 goals. Brian White still is top 10 in MLS scoring. That's a good return from a number 9. They addressed their key areas of need, in goal over the offseason. In midfield, they're a lot deeper now. They have another guy, Adekugbe, at the number 6 position, who's playing at a top level for his position. They've got depth now. Like you look across this lineup, you still got guys like off the bench, like Raposo, Laborda, Hoilett, Schopf, Betcher. Like those are some pretty decent options off the bench as well. So they've got depth. Really, for me, if anything, I'd say the only thing holding them back is defending, because offensively, this team is good. Like people, especially, I don't know, out west here, even out west, people don't realize the Whitecaps are second, or no, not even. The Whitecaps are top in MLS in expected goals for, and even when you remove penalties, I think they're top 2 in expected goals for without penalties. And because of that, their expected goal differential is, I think, second in MLS. For most of the last 5-10 years, the Whitecaps are always middle to bottom. So, like, first of all, they play the right way. They get the ball in the right areas of the field. It's just defensively has kind of been holding them back a bit. So that's the one thing I'm watching for. But in terms of the attack, they've got the depth, and they've got a star that can lead them away. So, and based on how the West is this year, no one seems to want to win the West except St. Louis. So there's no reason why the Whitecaps can't go up against anyone in the West and make a push deep into the playoffs.
I like it. You got someone who agrees with you as well. So, guys, if you have any questions right now around the Hoilett signing, the Whitecaps, really anything, we got 10 or so minutes left in the stream. Get your questions in. I'm going to just basically focus on, answering you guys and finish this stream strong, because it is exciting. Like I said, I just have so many good memories of Junior Hoilett over the years when I was young, 12, 13-year-old Josh playing FIFA. It was just super cool. We didn't have the luxury of seeing all this talent over in Europe and even in Major League Soccer. So seeing someone like Hoilett committing, I remember it like it was yesterday. I truthfully do. So to see him be able to come back to Canada is really special to me. And I'm excited to see, hopefully how he will get on in this league, how he's able to now play with Laryea, Adekugbe, 2 important players in the national team right now. I'm honestly really excited. I'm really happy for him, and I'm happy for the Whitecaps fans. And that's the thing. Like, I've already seen a few comments in the chat right now saying I'm excited. I'm happy. I have season tickets. It's going to get me, excited to go to the game. It's a really, really good story, and I'm expecting some big things. But Alex, if you were going to take a look now at the playoff picture, obviously TFC's out in terms of the Canadian teams. How much more likely do you think it is that the Whitecaps go on a run this year versus CF Montreal? Because, like I mentioned, CF Montreal has been one of my favorite teams to watch in MLS, really, in the last few years. A lot of turnover each year, as we know. You and I did an excellent video, I thought, on the amount of, how much different teams spend. Whitecaps at the time were pretty low on that list, and I believe CF Montreal were dead last, but they still find these gems, and they still have so much talent. But do you think it's more likely that Vancouver goes on a deeper run than Montreal if indeed both make the playoffs?
Yeah, I think so. I think Montreal last year was their real chance because they had a lot more going for them. Among those things I mentioned, they actually had a great defense. For them, it was goalkeeping that sunk them for most of the year. They had depth at all positions. They had guys like standouts like Mihailovic, Kyoto. You look at the midfield, Kone, Wanyama. Like for me, Montreal had everything going for them. Yet in the playoffs, they had that game against, I think it was NYCFC, and it all just went wrong for them. Um, I think now you look at this year, there's already, like, for example, I'm looking who's going to kind of step up in the playoffs up front, because in the attack, Kyoto's been injured all year. They lost to Mihailovic. Opoku's been a good signing, but he still has to find his feet in terms of being a guy up front for them. You look, right, like who's gonna, for me it's gonna, who's gonna score the goals in the playoffs. I think we've already seen that as well in some of the big games this year. Who's gonna score for Montreal in the Canadian Championship final? Is Sanusi Ibrahim got them a late goal off the bench, but he's barely been able to get minutes. Chinoso 4 is just too inconsistent up front. It's just been a battle for them. Jules Anthony Vilsaint looks like he could be someone to watch out for, but he's still finding his feet as a professional as well. Like, you don't want to put all that pressure on him yet. So I think for Montreal, because of that, like, I think defensively they've had flashes. I mean, especially at home, they're very good defensively. Jonathan Sirois stepped in. They've got a good back three. Piet's healthy again. But I see too many question marks offensively, whereas Vancouver, there are question marks about them defensively, which could hurt them in the playoffs, but they have enough options who can score, who can create offense. It's just, can they tighten up defensively? And I think, as they've also shown this year, really other than that two-legged series against LAFC in the Champions League, as it was called at the time, they've shown well in these big games. They won the Canadian Championship final at home. In Leagues Cup, they went up against Tigres and Leon and showed that they can compete with two top Mexican teams. I think they've shown that they can compete with anyone on their day, and the fact that they have the goals, I think the Whitecaps are probably an easier favorite to go deeper. And it also helps that if their backs are against the wall, they can turn to a likes of a Ryan Gauld, a Pedro Vite, a Laryea, Adekugbe, etc. Whereas Montreal, I don't think really has that luxury on the offensive side of things.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, Matthew Choinière, he's one of my guys. I love watching him this year. You can't forget him, but I get what you're saying. I always find this year with CF Montreal, you don't really know what you're going to get match to match. Some incredible performances, surprising results, and then, what happened matches. So I definitely agree with that, where the Whitecaps to me are just a more consistent team. You know pretty much what you're going to get. But I would say you kind of spoke on it, just the fact that there's X factors in this team. And when it comes to a playoff push, you have guys to step up. Ryan Gauld is having a season. And I also want to make sure that everyone knows this, because this has been a bit of debate for a while. But Brian White is a legit, solid MLS striker. I feel like I underplayed that a little bit. But when Cavallini was there, I remember, obviously he was making a lot of money, Cavallini, and he, didn't live up to the expectations we had. But Brian White outperformed him and took his spot relatively quickly, and had a great return in goals. And he's done it. Like, he's a consistent striker in this league. And I really like the chemistry that you see between White and Gauld. And come playoff time, those two are going to be an important player. I think when you look at the CF Montreal side of things, I still would look at Choinière, because he gives you a little bit of everything. He would put his heart and soul into the game, run himself ragged, and hopefully he's come up with goals this year. So, but you're looking at one team and you have a legitimate striker and one of the best 10s, in the league. And then on the other side, you have Matthew Choinière playing all over the park. When it comes to an opportunity like in the playoffs, I kind of look at more of the Whitecaps side in terms of just like that X factor.
Well, and the fun thing is, you want some stats on Ryan Gauld. I mentioned Brian White being he's tied for 10th right now in the Golden Boot race, which again is wild, because White should have 15 goals this year and should be leading the darn race, but that's a whole other story. And he doesn't take penalties either. If he was taking penalties, he actually could be leading the Golden Boot race. But Gauld, he actually got his first assist, I think, in May, like his first goal contribution of the season. He is now up to 4th in MLS in goal contributions with 18. The only guys ahead of him in all of MLS are Lucho Acosta, Hani Mukhtar, and Thiago Almada. Like, that's a pretty good list of company to be in for goals plus assists. And plus, Gauld is, I think, 1 goal away from being in the top 10 as well for goals as well. Obviously, it helps that he takes the penalties, but that's still, he hasn't missed a penalty yet. He's been clutch. He puts them away. And I mean, yeah, I think Ryan Gauld, if he was putting up those numbers and his name was Lucho Acosta, or if he was playing in Atlanta, you'd be hearing about it a lot more. So I just think it's something that's been underplayed, even within, Vancouver. You don't realize, like, this dude's playing at like one of the like, it wouldn't even be an exaggeration to say that he's playing like one of the top 5 players in MLS, at least top 5 offensive players. Yet, based on the fanfare he was getting, you'd think he was just plugging it away, playing left back for the Whitecaps, and it just shows how important and how good he's been.
Yeah, and the fact that Scotland have not called him up yet keeps the door open down the road for Canada. Maybe, we think. We had him on there, but all right, a couple more questions before we go. This one, Alex, you talked about obviously tightening up at the back, focusing on set pieces. Does that worry you at all, or do you think there's going to be some adjustments there during the playoffs?
It's huge. I think the defensive issues crop mostly from the air. They just give up too many cheap chances, too many cheap goals in the air, and a large part of that is set pieces. The big reason is just they don't have a guy who's all that good aerially. Like, Ranko Veselinovic is very good at 1v1 defending and on the ground. Last time I checked, he was winning like 55% of his aerial duels, which for a center back, that's just, you'd expect them to win 65, 70% of their duels. So, and then Blackman, he's good in the air, but he's a bit smaller, and they like him on the outside of a back three with his speed. Laborda's great in the air, but he's just a bit wild and reckless. They don't really like him playing in the middle of a back three. So because of that, there's not that many aerial presences. Even you look at guys like, White can help and defend, but you look at guys like Gauld, Vite, etc. They're not all, units in the air. Adekugbe's good in the air, though, and maybe his presence can help on defensive set pieces. So I think, yes, set pieces and aerial balls are the big concern I'd have with the defense, just because there's not really many solutions. Because the guys who are good in the air, like the likes of Laborda, even a Karifayao, they just haven't really been trusted. And, I don't think that's going to change in these sorts of games of this magnitude.
No, I don't either. This is great for the Caps and the Canadian national team. Hoilett is still class. Another little flowers for the White and Gauld partnership. And I totally agree with this, because I personally do think that, White is a good MLS goal scorer. I think you can trust him to put up probably double digits, I'm assuming, for the next foreseeable future, but he's a good goal scorer, and his hold up play is excellent. And it really complements a player like Gauld, who's, just very good on the ball, technically gifted, can play a little bit behind him. I totally agree with that point. And the last question of the day is going to Vincent, who says, what do you guys think happens with Habibullah? There's a lot of talk about a loan to Spain. It broke down. Seems that there's no future at Vancouver for him. Alex, any thoughts on Habibullah?
Yeah, it's been a tough one, just because as well, even last year he went to Pacific and just couldn't really get consistent minutes with that. I think for him, figuring out either a move to maybe in Europe like he tried. Not sure what happened with there. I'll have to go figure out an update on that. If not, maybe go back to the CPL and just really be the guy on a team. I think that's been the big thing, especially what's hard for a player like him, because he's very creative, very talented. It's hard for opportunities as well, because I'm looking at him on the Whitecaps. Okay, if you want to path to him in the first team, who are the number 10s he's now going up against? It's Ryan Gauld, it's Pedro Vite, and it's Junior Hoilett now. Like, that's just, for a young player, that's a tall ask. And even you add in that Antoine Coupland stepped in and kind of jumped ahead of Habibullah in the pecking order. I think for a creative number 10, you have to develop consistency and kind of go be the guy for a team. So for Habibullah, I think maybe the best solution could be going to a CPL team, for example, and really becoming an offensive difference maker and really finding that. Because I think that's what we've seen with the likes of a Bustos, who had a similar issue when he was younger with the Whitecaps. It was hard to break in as a number 10. He had to go to USL. He had to go to, Valor. Had to go to Pacific to really find that sort of consistency in his game. Manny Aparicio's another example, where even in his case, he went from more of a 10 to becoming a number 8 to really find his game. I think Habibullah might need one of those. Maybe he has to go to the CPL and really become the guy for a team. Because even his lone stint in Pacific, he didn't get that chance. Like, even compared to Sean Rea at Valor, Sean Rea got to be the guy for Valor. He's just in the doghouse under Lasada at Montreal. That's a whole other different scenario. Whereas Habibullah, I feel like for him to take that next step, I want to see him dominate a level like the CPL.
I love a player like Habibullah. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head right now, like, what CPL club could use him. I'm looking at maybe Vancouver FC, maybe they do like a 4-2-3-1 next season. It's right in Vancouver. I don't know. Do you think, quickly before we go, is there a better fit right up top of your head that you think, Habibullah could go there, there's an opening for him to play, for him to start and kind of be able to play his game. And I just, off the top of my head, I'm just trying to think, and I'm like, Vancouver could do it.
Vancouver's an easy one. I mean, we spend a lot of time asking or looking at Valor. He could maybe be that Sean Ray replacement they never got this year. You could even argue like, I'd say those are probably the best two. Even in Ottawa, for example, maybe Gianni Dos Santos hasn't been the Tabla replacement they wanted. Could have Habibullah, because Habibullah is kind of one of those where you can play on the wing, can play as a 10, so that kind of fits the hybrid Ottawa system. I think maybe some teams like that could make sense for him.
All right, I want you guys to go away thinking about the fact that Valor, despite maybe using Habibullah, need a striker. That is
always.
That is what they need.
Habibullah plus a striker. That's
a striker. There you go.
Maybe that's Phil Dos Santos' Christmas wish list, because Dos Santos did work with Habibullah in Vancouver, so there could be a relationship there.
Bring Sean Hundle over, and that team looks drastically different. But that is all the time, guys. I appreciate everyone tuning in for the stream. Be sure to drop a like on your way out. Drop a sub. Alex, as always, was a lot of fun, and hope everyone will enjoy this weekend's match between TFC and the Whitecaps. It should be a good one. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.